For Creamer Media's Polity, I'm Sashnee Moodley. Researcher and analyst Professor Raymond Suttner joins me to discuss whether it is correct to revisit the Zuma rape trial. Welcome, Professor.
Thank you.
Is your article directed at condemning Zuma's conduct, or is it a criticism of some of the calls for his resignation?
Writing this article was sparked by two things. On the one hand, I was very impressed with the four young women holding up posters at the Election Results Centre and reviving in the public's discourse the question of the Zuma rape trial. But I also believe that we should be looking at that trial again. An atmosphere of intimidation has reigned over the Zuma rape trial at the time of the trial, but also in the period after the judgment. People were discouraged, they were intimidated from questioning the judgment. Now, it's very normal in court cases to criticize judgments. And in this case, however, because the complainant could not, so a person known as Kwezi then could not appeal herself, because the prosecutor had to appeal and the prosecutor didn't appeal, there wasn't this sort of criticism of the judgment that one had on the part of Pistorius's counsel or the prosecution who were then appealing. So it's quite normal to criticize judgments, and I think it's important that we should do so. But the other reason why I thought it was necessary to write this article is that I think it's very important that when people call for the resignation of Zuma as an important factor, not the only factor in my view, but an important factor that needs to be dealt with in order to remedy the crisis of democracy in South Africa, that we have to understand what are the reasons. It's not just Nkandla. It's not just corruption in general, the court case. It's not any single factor. But one of the factors is the lessons to be learned from the Zuma rape trial. Because in that one trial, you had a lot of things that are with us today. You had the pummeling of the complainant. The way the defense of Zuma was raised was really a military type attack on the complainant in court and outside. In court by questioning her psychological stability, bringing up her so-called sexual history. Much of it was abuse as a young woman, as a young child. You had the cultural arguments of Zuma, which are still with us, this idea that some things are un-African, and you can't really debate African culture, especially if you're white or non-African. And I think what that trial did was to try and close down debate on gender rights, on notions of masculinity, because the court and the prosecution allowed Zuma to determine what it is that a Zulu man regards as an invitation to sex, and that overrides what the woman has, and silence means consent in their view. And what happened outside the courtroom needs to be looked at. The violent threats to the complainant, the Zulu ethnocentrism describing Zuma as 100% Zulu, the militaristic way he came out of court, no modesty in his demeanor, but singing Umshini Wam, which is a war song with phallic imagery. So I think it's very important that those people who are calling for the resignation And I mentioned Ronnie Kasrils is one exception, does seem to have mentioned the trial. Zak Yaqub, who was at Constitutional Court, but the context in which Judge Yaqub raised the trial was a different context, not over there. But with their exceptions, as far as I'm aware, everyone is silent. None of the people said anything about the rape trial at the time of the rape trial or since it. So are we to read that that's not important? If we read it that way, it says something about patriarchy not being central. And as I said in my article, patriarchy is connected to violent masculinities. Violent masculinities are a scourge of our society. Most violence everywhere, not just South Africa, is by men, but in South Africa it's especially violent, and that trial was emblematic of it. So those were the reasons I raised it.
What purpose can be served now by this matter resurfacing?
I think that if we reflect on that case, and if there's a public self-reflection by people who were involved in it, who were involved in the rise of Zuma, who have called for the fall of Zuma without raising this question, perhaps we can examine what it meant to interpret the silence of this person, what consent to sex means, and what does not mean consent. The notion of freezing. Jacques de Pelchin, as I quoted there, says silences are facts that have not yet been recognized as facts. Silences can often have meanings. Also, I think it's important that we should learn from the hostility towards the woman then known as Kwezi. Why was there no compassion towards her? Why was she hounded out of the country? Can something not be done to redress the wrong that was done to her? All of this is separate from whether Zuma was correctly found not guilty or not. The lack of compassion, the hostility towards someone. What does it mean about someone who wants to bring a charge of rape against a high public figure? We need to remedy that in order for democratic life to be as part of restoring our democratic life.
Thank you, Professor. That was Professor Raymond Suttner speaking to Creamer Media's Policy about whether it is correct to revisit the Zuma rape trial.